Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel, New Generation HVAC. In this video, I want to go ahead and talk about the second part of saturation temperature. Now, if you do not know what saturation temperature is, I encourage you to go to the previous video that I made. There's where I go ahead and start talking about what saturation temperature is and how I use an example of water to go ahead and demonstrate how saturation temperature works. Now, on a brief note, remember, saturation temperature is where in my air conditioning system, the refrigerant is both in the state of liquid and vapor in the same place at the same time. Now let's go ahead and put the pieces together right here. We're going to go ahead and put my four major components once again together. And my four major components once again are my compressor, my condenser, my meter device, and my evaporator. Now in my previous video, I also mentioned the manifold gauges. Remember how in my manifold gauges, I mentioned that the outside of my manifold gauges were my pressures. And everything on my inside, all those numbers on my inside are my saturation temperatures. Now, depending on my system and what type of refrigerant is inside of my system, that's the saturation temperature that I'm going to be looking for, depending on the color of my refrigerant. Now, not all refrigerants are color-coded the same. The majority of my refrigerants are always color-coded differently. Like that, I could be able to distinguish my different refrigerants. Now, let's say, for example, I'm using the refrigerant of 410A, right? So 410A, in this case, I went and I drew it as maybe a greenish color, right? So let's say 410A is a greenish color. In reality, 410A is actually a pinkish color. And my greenish color is R22. But I'm going to go ahead and use green as an example for 410A. So let's say we're looking at 410A and the green one right here is the one I'm actually looking for, all right? So I go ahead and I turn on my air conditioning system and I go ahead and put it on the cooling mode. So then my compressor starts running, and as my compressor starts running, what starts happening? Well, my refrigerant starts moving around the system. And that's why I put all these arrows indicating the flow of my refrigerant. So as the flow of my refrigerant is going through the whole system, there's something very interesting happening. There's a change of state happening in my condenser, and there's a change of state happening in my evaporator. Now, if I go ahead and pay attention to my manifold gauges, depending on, once again, if I'm looking at 410A, let's say 410A is giving me at 110 degrees. And over here, 410A is giving me at about 42 degrees. What that means is that my condenser temperature, or my saturation temperature in my condenser, is 110 degrees. And the saturation temperature of my evaporator is around 42 degrees. Now, once again, saturation is where refrigerant is in a state of both liquid and vapor in the same place at the same time. And where does that happen in my air conditioning system? Well, that's why I drew a dotted line right here. That dotted line right here, also in my evaporator, those dotted lines are actually my saturation lines. And that right there is where I'm measuring my saturation temperature. So what's actually going on is that my condenser is pumping my refrigerant throughout this system. It goes into my condenser first, and it goes in a state of vapor. In another video, I'm going to go ahead and talk about what state should my refrigerant be at what part of my system. All right, we'll go ahead and pinpoint different points in my air conditioning system, and we'll go ahead and talk about what state my refrigerant should be at, and at what pressure, and at what temperature. But for right now, just go ahead and visualize this with me. We have vapor refrigerant, all right, so we have gas refrigerant going into my condenser, and as it's passing through my condenser, remember what's actually going on is that it actually absorbs heat. Remember that? So it actually absorbs heat from my evaporator. So as it's coming into my condenser, now that heat is being rejected, and because it's being rejected, so remember remember above 212 degrees, the state of my water is in a vapor form or in a gas form. Once it goes below 212 degrees, it should be in a liquid form. The same thing with my refrigerant. My refrigerant is at a certain temperature. Once it hits below temperature of where it should start becoming a liquid, then after this saturation line is where my refrigerant is in a state of liquid refrigerant right around here. But remember, what's actually going on is that once again, there's a change of state, right? So the change of state is happening where gas is converting into liquid, or the refrigerant is turning into liquid. All right. So right here at about this point, my refrigerant is in a state of gas and it's changing into liquid, and then it starts forming into liquid. And by the time probably it hits here, it should be in a complete state of liquid. All right. And the same thing happens over here in my evaporator. Now in my evaporator, the refrigerant starts entering in a state of liquid. And then as it starts absorbing heat, well, my refrigerant starts to boil. And because it starts to boil, just like the water starts to boil, and it goes from 210, 211, 212 degrees. Once it hits that boiling point and that saturation temperature line, it goes from a liquid all the way till it hits that saturation line, and then it starts turning into a vapor. It starts changing state from a liquid to a vapor. And because once again it's absorbing heat and it's changing state, so now it's changing from a liquid to a vapor. And so by this point it should be in a complete state of vapor, going back into my compressor. My compressor is going to go ahead and pick up the pressure, pick up the temperature, compress it once again, but it still remains in a state of vapor. And that happens over and over and over again. So that's my saturation temperature in my air conditioning system. That's where I find my saturation temperature in my condenser coil and my saturation temperature in my evaporator, and how I can go ahead and find my saturation temperature on my manifold gauges and go ahead and put them together. I put this saturation temperature with this coil, and I put this saturation temperature with this coil. I want to go ahead and thank you for sticking around and watching this video. If you like this video, make sure to leave a thumbs up. Make sure to also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the new videos that I will be uploading. Like that, you can go ahead and once again stay informed, stay up to date of my air conditioning system. You know, I started talking about the basic cycle of refrigeration. I went and I started off with the 4 major components. You know, once again, my compressor, condenser, metering device, my evaporator, and then I talked about the low side and the high side of my system. And after that, now I started talking about the saturation temperatures, how the saturation temperature works in my air conditioning system. And you know, now we also started going into the manifold gauges. So now once again, we're putting all the pieces together. We're putting all the pieces together of how my air conditioning system should work. Like that, if you ever go out and work on an air conditioning system, you would know how to troubleshoot it. So more videos are to come, more on my air conditioning system, on my refrigeration side of my air conditioning system, and also more to come on my troubleshooting and electrical side of my air conditioning system. So make sure you don't miss those and stick around for the next videos. And that being said, I'll go ahead and I'll see you on the next one.